Sounds like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but hopefully you can hear me. Let's see. All right. Hello out there. Welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm your host, Adam Preston, and we're coming tonight with our live Monday Roundtable. Capitol Hill is a free government simulation. If you're not already playing our game, come check us out at TedderVision.com/Capitol Hill. Today we're actually starting a brand new round, so if you're just finding us, it's a great time to come on over and check it out. Tonight I am joined by our conservative analyst, Alan Freedom. Alan, it's good to have you back, man.
Hey, thanks for being here. It's great to be here.
And on our liberal side, we have Jan Jackson. Jan, good to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me. I very much look forward to tonight's discussion.
I am too. So let's just jump right into it. So Alan, we're looking back at the 2016 election, and it was a clear win for your side, wasn't it? The Republicans come into this new Congress, they control the House, they control the Senate, they control the White House. It's pretty much only upside for you at this point, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. They got everything they wanted. They made a clear case to the American people and said, look, these are the things we need to change. Give us the power to do it, and we will do it. And so this is their opportunity to follow through on all those promises they made in 2016.
And before I turn it over to Jan, so there is, a little bit of a dark cloud in the sky. The president, he called President-elect Fitzgerald. He said that he was disappointed with the confirmation of Merrick Garland. Is that something? Do you share that sentiment, or are you just looking to, accept it and move forward? What do you think about that?
Well, it was disappointing to a conservative to have such a very unconservative justice put on the Supreme Court in what could have been a pick for Fitzgerald, and does swing now the Supreme Court visibly to the left. But I think moving forward, they could still do a lot, hopefully.
Jan, how are you feeling about this? Do you look at the Garland confirmation as, a silver lining of an otherwise disappointing year, or do you have, are you a little bit more optimistic than that?
Well, I think the Garland confirmation is simply Congress doing their job. So President Obama nominated a moderate justice that Republicans in the Senate had even asked for previously, and I think the senators did their job in confirming a nomination by the president.
Go ahead, Alan. I know you want to jump in.
Oh, I do.
I'm glad you're laughing at the Constitution. Good job.
Oh, I love you too, Jan. A couple things. One, he wasn't really that moderate at all. He's actually quite liberal. Two, it's never been the precedent for a sitting duck president, for a lame duck president to mixing up my terms here, for a lame duck president to nominate a Supreme Court justice on his way out the door. And I can't believe that the Republicans in the Senate allow that to happen.
Well, it's not typical that a Supreme Court justice dies in a lame duck term. So I think the president was simply saying, hey, it's my constitutional duty to make sure the Supreme Court is operating at full capacity. So I'm going to nominate a justice that I know is more moderate, that I know Republicans have previously advocated for, that will be the best way to bridge as many gaps as possible. And the senators in Congress did their job, which is not something I can say very often. So I'm happy to be able to say it today.
Alan, let's see if we can narrow this down a little bit. You both seem to. So is Garland a moderate or is he a liberal?
I don't think he's moderate at all, although I could be mistaken. I mean, people also thought that Kennedy was going to be more conservative, and he ended up really pooping the bed on that one. So it could turn out that I'm wrong. But from all of his time in the lower courts, he doesn't look really that moderate to me.
I think if Kennedy is too liberal for you, then just about anyone is too liberal for you.
Fair enough.
And, we have the next 4 years. President Fitzgerald may get another opportunity. We'll see.
True, you never know.
You never know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead if you want to wrap us up on this.
I was simply going to say, let's hope it's from a retirement and not another death.
Oh, of course, I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
Glad we're agreed on that.
Jan, I wanted to ask you about the hashtag #MeToo movement. That's been, it's been reverberating not only in Hollywood, but in business circles, even here on Capitol Hill. Do you think that this is a permanent shift that we're seeing? And if so, what is it going to look like? And where is this going to end up?
I personally hope that this is not a temporary flash in the pan situation. I think it's so amazing that we have so many survivors of sexual assault, sexual harassment, and rape coming forward and sharing their stories. So often these stories are missed by the justice system, or victims, particularly women, are too afraid to come forward because of what it all entails. And it's amazing and inspiring that they're coming forward now to seek justice that they were denied when they were being victimized. I don't know where it's going to stop, but I hope this allows more and more people to be open in seeking retribution and justice for being victimized. It will hopefully shift our culture to a point where we no longer have to have these discussions.
Alan, do you agree that we're seeing a culture shift here?
Oh, I don't really know if I'd say that. I think that the narrative that there's somehow this rape culture is non-existent, it simply does not exist. Are there actually instances of rape? Yes. And if they're legitimate, they should be pursued by the courts. There are also some that were less legitimate, most notably the Duke lacrosse players. And there was also the fraternity, I can't remember what college that was at. Also turned out to be bogus. And I saw a lot of those Me Too people getting behind those sort of cases, and then they turned out to be completely bogus. So I'd somewhat hesitate to jump on the Me Too bandwagon before really knowing the facts.
Jan, doesn't he bring up a good point that, sometimes in our pursuit of justice, in our pursuit of, righting these wrongs and, making these victims whole, that sometimes we abandon due process. Sometimes we jump to conclusions. And there are instances where that's happening within the Me Too movement. Do you think that that's harming the legitimacy of it? And how do you feel about that?
Well, we know that 96% of people who report being sexually harassed, sexually assaulted, or raped are telling the truth. That is what the science says. The research points to that number. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to believe the woman, or any of the victims for that matter, because it's not just women, but it's also men and trans folks who are also who are also survivors of this kind of unfortunate behavior. Those two high-profile cases mentioned what those were eventually found was that there wasn't enough evidence to support the story being told. Those are two cases out of thousands. So I don't think raising up those two cases as examples for everything is a very strong argument. I honestly think we don't do a good enough job at even adjudicating these cases, because what might be perceived by one thing by one party could be perceived differently by a different party. And so we need to make sure that we protect due process, but that the survivor stories are given precedent.
I wanted to go ahead and unpack something that Alan said a minute ago. Alan, you mentioned, it's a buzzword that people are triggered by and that they use sometimes out of context. You mentioned rape culture. I was wondering if you could go ahead and define that for our guests and see if we could unpack this a little bit.
You want me to define it?
What did you mean? What did you mean whenever you said that? Whenever you said that, and would you care to back up that it does or doesn't exist?
Oh, okay. Well, that's why I'd find it hard to define it, because I think it doesn't exist. It's something that's often used by the sort of Me Too sort of movement, that somehow there's this culture among men of rape. It's simply just not true. The cases of rape are very astronomically small, actually, and I do believe that victims should be heard and should be believed as far as they should be able to bring their case and have their day in court. I would ask my colleague on the left if he also believed Paula Jones and Juanita Broderick as well.
Sure. Go ahead, John.
So, yes, rape culture is probably not the best term for what it represents. It's not the idea that, every man wants to rape every female. Rape culture is the idea that we live in a society, whether that's broader society as the whole nation or even small community societies such as a workplace, a campus, et cetera, are hostile towards people who come forward with accusations of being victimized, either sexual harassment, sexual assault, or rape. So that's anytime we say something like, oh, she deserved it, you look at the way how she was dressed, or we say something like, oh, he's a man, he can't be raped, or something like, oh, well, if she was drunk and she was just being stupid, so that was the consequence of her actions. That all contributes to a rape culture. The idea of having a day in court, in theory, is nice, but the problem is when you are a survivor of something that's so traumatic, having that time in court could cause more harm. And we all know what PTSD is. We all know how crippling it can be for someone. And to ask somebody who was violated in this most intimate of ways to go forward in a public space to relive this trauma, I think is asking too much, which is why I said earlier we need to figure out a way to properly adjudicate this.
Well, it sounds like you're trying to get it both ways. You say you want the women to be believed, but then you say, oh, but it's too hard to go out in court because I might have some people who won't like that. So you can't have it both ways. It's their choice whether they want to come forward. And if they do come forward, they should have their day in court and be able to present the facts in court. But if they don't, then that's their choice. You can't somehow blame that on other people.
You can when there's a system that doesn't allow them the ability to have their voice. And that's what the problem is currently. If we found a way to let them share their story, say, for instance, a more private way of taking a stand, that could be more beneficial and more helpful than forcing them into this big public square where they have to face the person that traumatized them in such a terrible, terrible way. Right? We don't ask our veterans to point out, like, oh, yeah, I was a prisoner of war, and that's the person that was torturing me. We don't ask our veterans to do that. We take their word from the stories they tell us once they come back, once we rescue them. So it's the same thing. PTSD can be a traumatizing, completely crippling for someone. So I don't understand why you want to cause that much harm to these survivors. What I'm arguing is that they need to be heard in a safe manner, which could be a private hearing with a judge, lawyers from both sides, at a police station or some other venue that the judge deems as appropriate.
But Jan, you've heard of the Sixth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to face your accusers in open court. So what you're proposing would directly violate the Sixth Amendment.
What I'm proposing is a way to have due process that doesn't cause crippling harm. That testimony can be used in court, and the defense can fight it. The defense lawyers will be present. What I suggest was the defense lawyers would be there. So it's not just one person talking to a tape recorder and that's it, without any kind of cross-examination or any kind of questioning. The idea is just to do it in a way that respects them and causes minimal harm while still allowing due process to be had.
Okay, fair enough. But let me ask you this: wouldn't that eliminate the sort of natural barrier for people who abuse that system and make false accusations? Because they have also happened. I mentioned a couple of them earlier. The lacrosse players at Duke was a big one.
I think we're getting a little bit in the weeds here.
But, I want a chance to respond to this because it's an important question that he raised.
Please.
And I would say that when people come forward with false stories of being kidnapped or attacked, we don't have to make it all the way to court before the police, who I have full trust in. Perhaps you don't, Alan. Police are able to say, hey, wait a minute, there's inconsistencies here. And they can stop before it even gets to that point. Judges are a second point in that to talk to these survivors as well. So I don't think that's such an issue. Because, again, as we know, 96% of folks are telling the truth.
I think one thing that we can, all agree on this issue is that we haven't seen the end of it. There will undoubtedly be more stories that are coming out, more men and even women that are under fire for, sexual abuse and impropriety and all that stuff. So I'm sure we'll be talking about this again later. With that being said, let's go ahead and move on with the time that we have remaining. So we have big news coming out of Washington that President Fitzgerald, he's not going to be running for re-election. Was this a shock? Let's turn to you, Alan, first. Was this a shock to you, or did you expect it?
What? Sorry, say that again. Was it a shock that
the president isn't going to seek re-election, and that he's
right.
admitting that already?
Yeah, I think that was kind of a shock. He's only a couple days into office, and he's already planning his exit a little bit.
Do you think it's going to be an advantage, though?
It could be, in a way that he wouldn't have to worry about pleasing the people that would re-elect him. He could say that and actually do what he feels is right and not have that sort of burden of needing to count your votes.
And, Jan, we'll come back to this. I want to get your input. But let me just go back to the Merrick Garland thing real quick. So President Fitzgerald, by his own admission, he's a lame duck now. So if there does become a vacant Senate or a vacant seat on the Supreme Court, are we going to see these same, political wranglings that we saw with Scalia's seat?
I hope not. He is the president. So whether I agree with that or not is not relevant. He's the president. Constitutionally, it's his job to make sure the Supreme Court can function at full capacity. It's the Senate's job to adequately vet and confirm whoever, or not confirm, if necessary, whoever the president appoints. So he can't appoint any old person that's unqualified. The Senate can reject that nomination, but if he nominates someone who is qualified, even someone who I personally would be like, oh, this person's bad for the country, that is his prerogative.
And if that does happen in a couple of years, are you going to be willing to come back on the program and call out Senate Democrats for it?
I would say if they allowed and confirmed an unqualified candidate, then yes, I will call them out.
All righty. Alan, any final thoughts on this before we go ahead and wrap up for the evening?
Well, I will give him that he's very intellectually honest by being consistent on both ends. If he does end up keeping that same line of argumentation, if it does happen.
I believe in an honest media.
Even though I just said that we were going to wrap up, I have another question I want to get in for you. So,
sure.
President Fitzgerald, in his announcement that he wasn't going to run again, he didn't necessarily give any concrete plans of what he intends to accomplish this term. Have you seen any of that coming out of the White House? What can we expect in this next Congress?
Which one of us are you asking?
Oh, Alan, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, hopefully I plan to see exactly what they promised to do in the 2016 elections as far as economically and as far as national security and border security. And so that's what I'd love to see. And he might actually be a little more free to do that if he doesn't have to worry about elections, hopefully.
Jan, do you agree with that?
Theoretically, not running for re-election would make him hopefully more beholden to the American people and doing what's right for the country as opposed to what's right for him politically. This is only a few days in. I am not convinced that he is not going to seek re-election.
That's interesting. You think he might, change his mind?
What greater privilege is there than to serve as the leader of the most amazing country in the world? Why would someone, after 4 years, why doesn't he just quit now and let someone who actually wants the job take over? He's not doing that.
Vice President Parker do it?
That would be quite an interesting 4 years, but I believe Vice President Parker might actually want the job, which it sounds like President Fitzgerald doesn't. So we'll see what happens.
And even if Kyle Fitzgerald does serve a full, there's no reason to think he won't. But even if, after 4 years, we might see Vice President Parker. Maybe that's what's really going on here, is that they're grooming the Vice President to take over. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting couple years, and 4 years, and 6 years, and it's going to be really interesting to watch with you guys.
Mhm.
Let's see. Let's go ahead and take a second to do, final parting shots from each of you, whatever you want to close this show out on. We'll go to, I feel like Alan's gotten a little bit more airtime tonight, so we'll go to Jan first.
As far as parting shots, I think it is a good thing that more survivors are coming forward with their stories of being sexually harassed, sexually assaulted, or raped. It's important that we have these conversations, that we believe these folks coming forward, and that we figure out a way to provide an adequate and just due process for both sides. And so I think moving forward, I look forward to seeing how the justice system adapts and works to make sure that they are serving their constitutional role of administering justice for everyone.
Fantastic. Alan, go ahead and wrap us up.
Alrighty. As far as the issue of Me Too, I think it best summed up by the phrase "trust but verify." Yes, we want to trust and believe the victims and the people that are coming forward and accusing, but we also want to verify, because even if it's a small amount, there have been some instances where it was unverified and unverifiably untrue, verifiably untrue. And so that's why I'm careful to really jump on any bandwagon of believing the victim or coming to conclusions before I actually know the facts.
Thank you. And that does it for us here on Capitol Hill. Now, if you Capitol Hill is a free government simulation. Come check us out at TedderVision.com/Capitol Hill. Come back on Thursday where we'll have a live debate between two of the biggest names here on Capitol Hill. And next Monday, we will be right back here for our Monday Roundtable. Have a good night. We'll see you next time.